Hi everybody, I'm Celeste. I'm a Nationally Certified Interventionist, and I want to welcome you to our fifth and final module of how to set effective boundaries without pushing your loved one further away. So in our first four modules, we spent some time talking about what a lack of boundaries looks like, what healthy boundaries look like, and the effects of both on our lives and the people around us. So today we're going to get into meat and potatoes of why we're here, and that's how to set effective boundaries. So the most important part in setting effective boundaries is to be assertive and to, rather than being passive or aggressive. Now, with passivity, passive people will often hint or be very indirect when trying to set boundaries with people. This is completely ineffective because the other person who's listening, especially if they're in active addiction, just aren't going to pick up on those hints or those indirect methods of communication. On the other end of the spectrum, there's people that will try to set aggressive boundaries, and that's by yelling, screaming, threatening, and all those kinds of things, and that's not effective either. Those are the kind of boundaries that are really going to push that other person away and create hostility and verbal fights. It could even lead to a physical fight. So we want to find somewhere in the middle and be assertive and be very clear and direct and honest with the other person about where we're at, and set those boundaries in a way that brings them closer rather than pushing them further away. So there's a couple of rules of assertion that I want to share, and tomorrow I'm going to post the whole list of rules of assertion because I think that these are really valuable for people. So a couple of the rules involve respecting yourself, recognizing your own needs as an individual, and relying on your own self for your own internal sense of happiness without getting your happiness from external sources. And a lot of people who have a loved one that's in active addiction, they think, oh, well, if that person would just quit drinking or using or whatever it is, I could just be happy. And you're placing a lot of responsibility on that other person for your happiness. And a couple more rules of assertion are not realizing that you're not responsible for that other person's behavior. You're not going to change their behavior. All you can do is change your own behavior and your own actions and your own thoughts. You're not responsible for making other people happy. You're not responsible for pleasing other people. Your only responsibility is to ensure that you're trying to do the right thing in your life and doing your own truth, and in doing that, not harming anybody else. So relying on other people, and that's very common in codependency and enabling, is relying on things out here to make us happy and making other people responsible for our happiness. And that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you. It's putting a lot of responsibility on that other person. In the same way that, we often try to, in codependent relationships or enabling relationships, we try to make that other person happy. We also have to realize that it's not our responsibility to ensure that other person's happiness. All we can do is try to find our own happiness and own fulfillment, and not put that responsibility on other people or take on that responsibility. So I really want to get now into some of the techniques, and I've talked a little bit about a couple of these in previous modules. Last time I mentioned the broken record technique. So and this is just really keeping it simple. And so when that person comes to you and asks you for something, say they call you up and ask you for money, and you just say, I'm sorry, Timmy, I can't today. We're really broke this month. I won't be able to do it. Oh, but Mom, I really need the money. I'm sorry, Timmy. We're really short on cash this month. I can't. So just repeating it over and over again until they get the point that you're not able to lend them money. Or if they call and say, oh, I'm stranded at a friend's house, can you come get me? Say, oh, I'm in a work meeting right now. You'll have to maybe call another friend or take a taxi home. Oh, but Mom, I'm really stuck. I don't have money, blah, blah, blah. Timmy, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm at a work meeting and won't be able to do it. So just, repeating that phrase over and over again until it's clear to them that you're not going to be able to do it. And, for people that don't feel comfortable in setting boundaries and perhaps have never done it in their entire lives, setting boundaries can be absolutely terrifying because of that fear of rejection or fear of not being accepted or fear of letting that person down or fear of conflict. There's all kinds of reasons why people are afraid to set boundaries. And often that's a pattern that's learned very early on. So it can be very scary. So what I encourage people to do in the early phases of setting boundaries is to keep it really, really simple. And, a one-liner just saying, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And you don't always even necessarily have to give a reason, just say, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. And because you really want to set yourself up for success. And if you come up with this big wordy lecture or speech about why you can't do it and, maybe how they need to be more responsible or whatever it is, there's a higher chance that you're going to stumble on your words. So I always encourage people to keep it very short and sweet in the beginning, especially when they're getting more comfortable, so you're not fumbling on those words. And even for some of the common questions that are going to come up from that loved one, if they're always asking for money, or if they're always asking for a ride, or always asking for a place to stay, have some of those answers pre-prepared. And even do it in the mirror and practice it, or see if you have another person, a friend or a spouse or a family member that can help role play with you. So have them play the person that's going to be asking for money or for a ride, and you practice saying no, and they can give you feedback. And they can tell you, oh, you came across as really passive, or you came across a little aggressive, or, changing your wording or your tone. And that can be very effective, is having somebody else to bounce those ideas off of and asking them, how would you react if I was saying that to you in that situation? So even the role playing can be very, very effective. And another thing too that I want to bring up here, and I think I mentioned it in one of the previous modules, is that when you're starting to learn to set boundaries, especially with somebody in active addiction, they're going to be used to you always saying yes or getting their way. So when you start to change the rules of engagement with them and start saying no and start honoring your own truth and what you feel comfortable doing, there's a good chance that you're going to get some pushback in the beginning until they realize that, oh, they're not gonna cave into me like they always have. So that's something to be prepared for too. And be prepared for that in the beginning. And I know I went through a lot of that when I first started setting boundaries with people, is that people couldn't figure out what's wrong with her. How come she's changed? She always used to bend over backwards to do stuff for us and to say yes to everything. And they couldn't figure out why I was changing. And, I had to explain to some people, I need to start practicing some self-care and taking care of myself first because I'm feeling burnt out. And, sometimes even having that conversation can be beneficial, but it very much depends on the situation and your relationship with that person. And sometimes people in active addiction, are so wrapped up in their addiction that they're maybe not going to care in that moment about your self-care because they're so wrapped up in what they need. So having those conversations as well as they're appropriate, and it's very much an individual process. And I think even in some of the comments in a previous module we were talking about, these techniques it's not a one-size-fits-all. So it's one of those things too that's going to take some trial and error. And I think I talked about this last time too, is that it's about practicing. When you're setting boundaries, it's really important to know why you're setting the boundary and knowing what you feel comfortable with and practicing it. And your first couple times, especially setting boundaries with people, afterwards, take a step back and look at it from the perspective of what went right, what worked really well in this situation and what maybe didn't work so well. So, and then you can say, okay, well, that went well. I can do that again in the future. And maybe this other aspect didn't go well, so I can tweak that going forward. And it's if something doesn't go well, or if you don't get the outcome that you're looking for, It's just, don't beat yourself up too much, because, like I was saying earlier, so many people struggle to set boundaries, and it's such an important issue that a lot of people really, really struggle with. And a lot of times this is a pattern that's been ingrained in them from a lot of times from childhood. And so it's not going to, and depending on how old you are, if you're 40 years old and this is how you've always been and you've never been able to set boundaries, it's not realistic to just wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to start being hard on people, I'm going to start setting boundaries, and nobody's going to violate my my truth and all, whatever your self-talk is. That's just not realistic, right? Because it's just going to set you up to feel disappointed. So taking those small steps in the beginning and really acknowledging your successes, and not beating yourself up too much if something didn't go as well as you wanted, and just learning from that and using that as a learning experience for it didn't work this time, we'll tweak it. So that's something really, really important in setting boundaries. And another thing about setting boundaries too is it's not always about your wording or what you're saying. There's other aspects to communication and setting boundaries. So even making eye contact, your phrasing, your choice of words, your tone. I mean, you can say something that if you say something very sarcastically, you're not going to get the same message across as if you say it very genuinely. So you can say the same thing with two different tones and it'll come across completely differently. So watching your tone, and also when you're engaging with somebody to set boundaries, finding a time that works for them, right? So if somebody's just getting out of bed, having a conversation about boundaries when they're just getting up and they're still tired and groggy, they haven't had their first cup of coffee yet, or when they first get home from work and they want to unwind for a few minutes before having a conversation. So the timing of that, of setting boundaries or having a conversation, is very important too. And also knowing the right issue, right? Sometimes we get upset about certain things and then realize that it's actually about a different issue, right? So making sure that you're discussing the right issue and that you're both very clear on what the issue is, because sometimes you might know exactly what the issue is in your head, and then you start talking to someone, they're like, I have no clue what you're talking about, but it's so familiar to you that sometimes and I'm guilty of this, I'll go to somebody and start talking to them. They're like, what are you even talking about? So making sure that going into a conversation that you're clear on what you're talking about, and sharing background information and just being really clear. So those are some other aspects in boundary setting that can be effective as well. And even going to somebody and saying, do you have a couple minutes that we can sit down and talk? Just making sure that it's a good time for them. So setting boundaries in that communication isn't just about what you say. It's about, there's so many different factors in communication, and even body language and how we're standing. For example, if you're standing very directly facing someone and in very close proximity, that can come across as being very aggressive or confrontational, right? So giving that person their personal space, and even just sitting a little bit more off to the side or angled, can come across as less threatening. So even that kind of stuff, your volume of voice, right? And sometimes too, even if you're standing quite a distance away from somebody and you bring up your voice a little bit so that they can hear you, they might interpret that as yelling at them. So all these are really, really important factors in setting boundaries and effective communication. And so that's a lot of what I have to say on effective boundary setting. And like I was saying earlier, boundaries are so individual. And those are just a couple of really good hints to get you going on setting boundaries. But setting boundaries are very individual. They're individual to the person who's setting them. They're individual to the person that's on the receiving end of them. It's individual to the situation. There's so many factors that come into setting boundaries. So it isn't a one size fits all. So if anybody out there is watching this and you'd like to do some more work on boundaries and bounce some ideas off somebody, you can touch base with me and we can set up a time to do some coaching on boundaries, and we can work through some of your specific boundary issues together, and we can work through some examples and start to tweak how you set boundaries so that you can be more effective in how you're communicating with people, and especially people in active addiction, so that you can feel respected and honored, and both of you can walk away from that conversation feeling like you've gotten something out of it, and that you both feel validated and respected and loved. So if you want to set up a session to work on some boundary issues, you can contact me. I've posted the information in the description for this live video, and you can also download. I have a free PDF on the 12 signs that your loved one needs an intervention. So you can follow that link and subscribe to the email list, and once you've subscribed, you'll be sent the free download. So I encourage everybody to download that because it's jam-packed full of great information. And I want to thank everybody for tuning into my live training session on how to effectively set boundaries with someone in active addiction without pushing them further away. So I've really enjoyed doing this this training series with you guys, and I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in, and I hope you guys learned a lot from it. And everybody out there, be safe. If you're in recovery, I want to encourage you to keep going, keep working at it, and keep up the good work. And for those of you in active addiction, I really hope that you can find the recovery that you deserve in life. Everybody deserves love, peace, joy, and happiness. So I really wish that to all of you out there tonight. And